This video is about empowering teachers.
Yes, we want those of you who have to use assessment in your classroom all of the time to understand how assessment people think, so you can evaluate when assessment is working and when it's not, and where exactly the breakdown is happening.
Think about driving a car. You might learn to drive the car to get around from point A to B. And most of the time, you don't need to know how to change the oil or fix a flat tire. But if you know these things, then you really know your car, and you know how it's put together.
Except in this case, what we are going to do is expose the assessment engine so that we can understand how it runs.
Right. Understanding how things works always helps.
So let's get started. We want to use assessments to find out where kids are and how they learn best, and what we can design to support their learning. Closely evaluating the assessments will give us that information to do that. When evaluating assessments, one of the first items we need to focus on is understanding construct. Assessments are designed to measure knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? Constructs are the knowledge, skills, or abilities being measured by an assessment item.
Seems very straightforward. We want assessments to measure evidence of how well students have achieved or made progress toward the learning goal.
Exactly. The problem is many assessment items include features, information, requirements, big words that are not relevant to understanding the student's knowledge, skill, or ability. Very often, the methods or materials used in assessment demand additional skills or understanding not directly connected to what's being measured or tested. These are considered to be construct irrelevant. Construct irrelevant features can create barriers for some students, preventing an accurate measurement of the construct that the teacher wants to measure.
Basically, construct irrelevant features can impact the student's ability to show what they really know or what they can really do.
Yes, for example, consider a math assessment that includes word problems to assess a student's understanding of a math concept. In this case, the ability to read fluently is construct irrelevant, meaning it's separate from the ability to do math problems and calculations. The barrier may be in the student's reading ability and not in their math ability.
Even though reading is an important skill, right, Tracy?
Yes, it's totally important, but it's not part of the construct that's being measured by the math teacher for this particular lesson. So what is the goal in measuring this construct, reading or math? Or think of a time test in science that students answer by handwriting. Handwriting requires motor coordination. Some kids have terrible handwriting, but they might still know a lot about the science skills or the life cycle of a plant, even though they cannot express it clearly in the written form. The barrier is the handwriting, not their science understanding.
Working under time pressure could also be a barrier for some students, and it doesn't really help the science teacher get an accurate picture of the student's knowledge of biology.
Exactly. Now, see how analyzing assessments works in practice. I brought a great example with me. For this assessment, the English teacher asked students to take a spelling test. So let me set the scene. The construct this teacher wants to measure is the student's ability to spell words. Think about all the subtasks that are also included in the spelling test as I tell you about it. First, the teacher asked the students to take a blank sheet of paper that's lined and number it 1 to 20 on the left side of the page on every other line. Then she told them that they should write their answers next to the number as she said the words aloud. The teacher had a really nice dictation structure and a very clear structure to ensure that the students would hear the words. First, the word was said out loud, then it was used in context in a sentence, and then it was repeated again. After the test, the student handed in their work. So here is one student's paper. If you take a look, you can see some numbers, you can recognize some letters, but some of them you can't. It's difficult to read any words on that page. So think about the construct that was being measured. The spelling. Then ask yourself, were there any construct irrelevant tasks that were built into this assessment that prevented us from measuring this student's ability to show what they know and how to spell?
I'm thinking yes.
Right. In this case, the teacher looked at the student's paper and was quite surprised. The student was always engaged, answering questions, and seemed to have no trouble spelling the words or discussing them during classes. The teacher was so concerned that he decided to give his student the same assessment in a different way. The teacher asked the student to spell the words out loud. And you know what? The student spelled every single word correctly, all 20.
That's so useful, Tracy, because it really demonstrates that when we build assessments that focus on the construct, on the content and the skills, We get a clearer understanding of the student's abilities, but we also isolate variables. I mean, maybe the student does need some support with writing or math, but at least now we can clearly see the interventions that that student needs.
The other thing I like about this example is how the teacher incorporated formative assessment through observation into their decision-making process and into the design of their assessment.
The teacher can now empower the student by talking about the learning process. The teacher can help the student become more aware of the way they learn and help them articulate their learning needs. Okay, so now we understand the terms construct relevant and construct irrelevant. But how does that really help us evaluate assessments or design better ones?
Well, one way to design or evaluate assessments is to break assessment down into individual items within the assessment. I like to use this handy-dandy chart created in collaboration with Michael Russell out of Boston College.
Tracy, just to clarify, you're saying we use the chart and these steps to look at the individual items or individual questions on an assessment, not the entire thing itself, right?
Exactly right. This process helps us look at our assessments and improve that assessment by identifying single questions that are problematic, items that may be ambiguous or misleading or have aspects that are construct irrelevant, and therefore they get in the way of a teacher truly understanding the student's knowledge. They prevent us from being able to gather good information.
Okay, so I'd say this is a really deep dive or a careful look. Nice, I get that.
So, on this chart you see step 1, present information. Basically, just like it sounds, at this step, the student is presented with an item in the assessment. Step 2, interact with the construct. This is where the student engages with the assessment item. They read, look at an image, question, or some type of stimulus, comprehend, and prepare to act. Step 3, produce response. This is where the student answers the question or demonstrates what they know in relation to that single item. Step 4, quantitative score. We make a judgment about the student's response and somehow represent that with a grade or a score. Basically, the big idea here is this. If there is a barrier at any one of those steps, that can interfere with the accuracy of the measure because educators will not be able to make a correct interpretation of the student's knowledge of that construct.
Okay, so to apply these steps to our spelling assessment example, I would say in step 1, present information, the teacher did a good job. The student knew the goal of the assessment was to correctly spell words, and the teacher said each word aloud. Then they used the word in context, and then said the word aloud again. In step 2, interact with the construct. Even if we set aside the construct irrelevant features of numbering the page, there are still barriers for our student. We saw our student could not demonstrate their skill of spelling when they had to do the task of writing the words.
Yes, and I would say that in step 3, produce response, our learner had been struggling to interact with the construct so much that the responses he produced were really incomplete and illegible. It's really too difficult from the responses on this paper to determine how well the student spells words. There are too many construct irrelevant demands in the assessment to determine if the student has met the spelling goals.
Then, in step 4, quantitative analysis. The teacher looked at the student's paper and scored it a 0. I mean, the student didn't write any words down, so I guess technically they did fail the assignment.
And finally, in step 5, inference to the construct, the teacher could have inferred that the student did not know how to spell these words correctly, and thus make an instructional plan to reteach the student how to spell the words on the assessment. Thankfully, this teacher examined not only the student's response on this assessment, but also looked at how the student had responded in class and weighed this summative assessment score against what the students had demonstrated on their formative assessments. The teacher concluded that the problem was with the assessment, not the student. So the teacher went back and asked the student to spell the words out loud, and as we already said, the student spelled every word correctly.
I'm so glad the teacher had been paying attention to those formative assessments.
Right. The results from the assessment reveal that the student might need some help with handwriting or with executive functioning, but the assessment did not accurately reflect the student's ability to spell. And if the teacher had assumed that the score did reflect the student's ability, our student would have failed the test, and the teacher might have spent instructional time reteaching how to spell, which could have led to a very frustrated student since they did know how to spell the words correctly.
So this step-by-step examination of an assessment also helps us think about how construct irrelevant features can become barriers and could interfere with how a student interacts with each item of an assessment along the way.
Right. In another example, if a student been asked to watch a video and to respond by clicking on a correct answer on the screen, but they struggle to manipulate a mouse, the score for the student on that assessment is not going to accurately demonstrate what they know. Or if a student was upset about events at home or came to school without eating breakfast, the student could be incredibly distracted and make it difficult to demonstrate understanding on assessments. This applies to our day-to-day instruction when we ask students to respond. What we are trying to say is that between analyzing and pinpointing the construct you want to measure and the final decision that is made about what a learner knows, there can be barriers. And our job is to break down the assessment so we can see the component parts and analyze what information we are really gaining from the assessment and make sure it's really connected to the intended learning goal.
Tracy, the idea of evaluating assessments seems like a lot of work.
It is, Amanda, but it's important we attempt to do this as educators so we really know what our students know and can do. We can make more informed decisions about teaching if we actually analyze how and what we ask of students. An added benefit is that we can also talk with students about barriers they faced in the assessment process, so they deepen their own learning about the knowledge and skills that they have or need to work on.
That makes sense. I think another big goal here is to make sure that we remove barriers so we can accurately understand what it is the students need to learn. In the end, the goal is really just to help the student understand their own learning preferences and give them the support they need to be successful at whatever learning they want to do. We aren't saying students shouldn't be able to do word problems in math or write a sentence with proper grammar. We want to keep high expectations for the learning. We just want to make sure we have the information we need to help students get there.
Exactly.
Okay, well thank you so much for helping us break down assessments, Tracy. As for folks at home or in the classroom, be sure to check out the grade level specific videos and playbook for more information.
Bye, everyone.